unfortunately, a lot of these old school preachers and that, not all of them, but there were a lot that got ensnared into some things that were,
Yeah.
prosperity and some weird things. And unfortunately, that put a sour taste. That kind of extinguished a lot of the fire that was happening back then in the 90s, from my
Mm,
understanding, right?
mm, mm.
And it's put a sour taste in people's mouths. And what I so they started experiencing, that's when, also around the time, I believe, that the Kundalini spirit started activating in the churches.
Mm,
That's when
mm.
you started seeing them slithering like snakes and doing some really weird things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it put a sour taste in people's mouths, because it was like, give the devil an inch and he takes a mile, and all of a sudden he came in like
That.
prosperity,
Yeah.
Kundalini spirit, and all this
That.
stuff. But so they started calling that the wildfire. The Kundalini spirit is the wildfire, because it's a false fire. And the thing is now what's happened is the church is so afraid of that happening in their services,
They
that
don't.
you
They just
but
started to control everything. They that's when all the
yeah,
humanness, because I control to ensure that, this wildfire doesn't break out. But now
exactly.
discern between the two.
Yeah. And the thing is, back then they didn't see it as deliverance being needed. They just saw it as somebody acting out in the church, right? Like, or the church being too over the top or whatnot. But see, if we could just combine the good things of the olden days, the
Yeah.
true fire of God, and 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 with the deliverance movement that is happening now, that way, when this thing should take place with the Kundalini spirit, and somebody starts doing some weird things in the service, well, if you're teaching and preaching about deliverance and educating people on what the signs of this particular spirit is or whatnot, then people would be more likely and more in tune to the fact that, hey, this is this is kind of happening to me. I think I need deliverance, and they'd be more willing to step into it. Plus,
Yeah.
pastors and preachers or whoever, or people in the church, would have a better understanding of it and would be able to deal with it through prayer and deliverance. Like, basically discipling the person and calling them in and saying, you know what, we're just gonna have a time of prayer. This is what I think is happening. Da 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 da, and you do it in love. And would you like us to do a prayer of, deliverance, whatever. But what I'm saying is, there's a way now. God has shown us how to control this from happening. So, how to control the move of demonic spirits in the church, right? How to bind that up, but still allowing God to move freely
Yeah.
in the church.
Yeah.
So, we need to be able to combine both the good fire of God, the fire of God, and while also eliminating and extinguishing the fire of Satan that's happening in our church. And I don't know how God's going to do it. We know he will do it. We're praying that he'll do it.
Yeah.
But, I think about Kilpatrick too, John Kilpatrick, and he said he was at the point where he was about to give up almost. He came under like almost like depression, because he was believing for so many years that revival could happen any minute, any minute, any minute.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, when he tells the story, he's like, literally, when revival finally broke out in this one service, is what kickstarted it with this one service. He said he didn't even want to go to church that day. He was so right. You remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I didn't think it was ever gonna happen. This was it. I was done. He's
Yeah.
like, I was pretty much done. I was just going through the motions. I was feeling
Yeah.
heaviness all the time. And he said the only reason why he even went to church that day was Father's Day. And he says,
Yeah.
because this little girl, I think it was a little girl or a little kid, anyways, asked him if he would be there or something like that. Like, something special was going on with this child. And so he knew, okay, I'll go because of this kid, right? Kids, man, I tell you, we need them. They did
Yeah.
great things, and God uses them. And
Hmm.
so he ended up going, but and revival did break out. But he was like, up until that point, there was a period of time, and so where he didn't feel it, and he now says, if you've been praying for God to move and for revival to come, for breakthrough or whatever, and he goes, and you're expecting it, and then all of a sudden you get to a point where it doesn't feel like it's ever going to happen, and you're actually feeling heavy and you're wanting to give up, He goes, probably that's around the point that it will actually come. God sends things to happen when you least expect it to
Mm.
happen.